If you love ghosts, cryptids, UFOs, and everything that goes bump in the night, then mark your calendars for the West Kentucky Paranormal Expo, happening September 26 in Mayfield, Kentucky at the Mayfield-Graves County Fairgrounds. This incredible one-day event brings together some of the biggest names in the paranormal community, including Aaron G. Thompson from Netflix's 28 Days Haunted, Jimmy and Jeffrey from Outlaw Paranormal, The Wind of Rose, Josh Morris, Michael Huntington, Rachel Ravensville, and many, many more special guests and speakers. Your admission is just $15, and that gets you an all-day come-and-go wristband so you can explore at your own pace. Browse more than 35 vendors, enjoy delicious food trucks, attend speaker presentations and panels, meet investigators, hear incredible stories, and dive into the worlds of hauntings, cryptids, UFOs, and the unexplained. Whether you're a seasoned ghost hunter or just curious about the mysteries that surround us, there's something for everyone at the West Kentucky Paranormal Expo. Tickets are on sale now. For more information, visit West Kentucky Paranormal Expo on Facebook and get ready for one of the most exciting paranormal events of the year. We'll see you in Mayfield on September 26th. New Year's Eve is supposed to be a night of celebration. A night when people gather together to say goodbye to the old year and welcome the new one. But on December 31st, 1872, hundreds of people crowded onto Lincoln Street in downtown Tullahoma, Tennessee, for something far more dangerous than a New Year's celebration. They'd come to watch a man and a woman risk their lives. Their names were Peter and Nina Conway, a husband and wife team of traveling circus performers who made their living entertaining crowds throughout the South. Their specialty was the high wire, and on that cold winter evening, they planned to walk more than 100 feet across downtown Tullahoma on a rope suspended roughly 40 feet above the street. There was no safety net underneath them. There was no harness attached to their bodies. If either performer slipped, there was nothing between them and the dirt road below. Peter Conway would make it safely across. His wife did not. And according to legend that has survived in Tullahoma for generations, Nina Conway has never stopped trying to finish that final walk. This is Southern Ghost Stories, and I'm the American Haunt Historian, Allen Sircy. So our story begins on New Year's Eve in 1872, when Peter and Nina Conway arrived in Tullahoma, following a successful tour through several small southern towns. Traveling entertainers were an important source of amusement during the 19th century. Long before radio, television, or motion pictures, the arrival of performers could provide an entire community with something to talk about. And the Conways knew how to get attention. Peter and Nina, they were aerial performers. They didn't need a theater. They didn't need some kind of circus tent. All they really needed were two high places, a long rope, and enough people willing to watch them tempt fate. Arriving in Tullahoma, the couple approached city officials and asked permission to perform their high wire act downtown that evening. Permission was granted, and the Conways rented a room at a local boarding house before beginning preparations for their New Year's Eve spectacle. And their chosen location was Lincoln Street. The performers stretched a sturdy rope more than 100 feet between the tops of two buildings. The rope would hang approximately 40 feet above the street. 40 feet might not sound particularly high when you're standing safely on the ground. But imagine climbing to the top of a 4-story building and looking over the edge. Now imagine stepping off that building onto a rope. That's what Peter and Nina Conway were trying to do. There'd be no elaborate modern rigging, no hidden safety cable, no giant inflatable cushion just waiting below. The act depended on experience, concentration, a balancing pole, and the performer's ability to keep their feet on a narrow rope while suspended high over downtown Tullahoma. One mistake could kill them. As afternoon turned into evening, word of the performance spread around town. People began pouring into downtown. Hundreds of spectators reportedly gathered along Lincoln Street. They bundled themselves against the winter cold and stared up at the rope stretched between the buildings. It must have been quite the sight. Tullahoma was still a fairly young town. The community had grown dramatically because of the railroad after the Civil War. Now, on the final evening of 1872, people stood shoulder to shoulder in the street waiting for two traveling circus performers to walk through the air high above them. As darkness approached, Peter and Nina appeared. The couple were dressed in colorful circus costumes designed to make them visible from the street below. They approached the edge of the rooftop together, and then they waved. The crowd erupted. For a few moments, the danger probably seemed secondary to the spectacle. Then Peter picked up his balancing pole and stepped onto the rope. The cheering faded. Peter carefully placed one foot in front of the other. The rope shifted beneath him. 40 feet below, hundreds of faces looked up. Peter extended the balancing pole across his body and continued forward. Every movement mattered. A high-wire performer doesn't simply walk across a stationary object. The rope reacts to a performer's weight. It moves, it vibrates. The performer's body has to constantly respond, making countless tiny adjustments while maintaining forward momentum. And Peter had more than 100 feet to travel. The crowd became increasingly quiet as he moved farther from the safety of the rooftop. There was no turning back without facing the same danger again. Peter continued. Step, balance, step, balance. Below him was Lincoln Street. Ahead of him was the opposite building. He kept his eyes focused on his destination. The spectators watched as Peter reached the midpoint of the rope and continued toward the other side. Eventually, after what might have seemed much longer than it really was, Peter approached the opposite rooftop. He took the final steps, and then he was safe. The street erupted. The same people who had been nearly silent moments earlier now cheered and applauded. Peter acknowledged the crowd with a bow. He had given them exactly what they had come to see. A man had walked across downtown Tullahoma, 40 feet in the air, and lived to tell about it. But the performance, the show, it wasn't over. Peter descended from the building and entered the crowd carrying a bucket. This is how traveling performers could collect their money. The show attracted the audience, and afterward the performer passed through the spectators, accepting coins or bills and anyone willing to pay for what they had just seen. Coins began dropping into the bucket. But while Peter worked his way through the crowd, people began looking back to the rooftop. Nina Conway was preparing to make the same journey. She stepped to the edge of the building. She waved to the spectators below. Then she picked up her balancing pole. If there were any nervousness, she apparently didn't show it. Nina was an experienced aerial performer. This is how she and her husband made their living. She had done this before. But every performance presented new danger. And this one was being held outdoors in winter, above a street. Nina placed her foot on the pole. Then she stepped away from the building. The crowd once again grew quiet. Nina slowly began crossing Lincoln Street, and like Peter before her, she stretched the balancing pole across her body and carefully advanced, one step at a time. She moved farther from the building, 10 feet, 20, 30. The rooftop behind her became increasingly distant. For a while, everything appeared to be going according to plan. Then the wind began to blow. A stiff breeze swept through downtown Tullahoma. 40 feet above the street, Nina felt it immediately. The rope moved. Her body shifted. Nina stopped. Then, instead of trying to remain standing, she carefully lowered herself and knelt onto the rope. The crowd below fell silent. Peter must have realized exactly how dangerous the situation had become. A high-wire performance requires extraordinary balance under ideal circumstances. Wind introduces something the performer cannot completely control. Nina remained on the rope. She waited. The spectators watched. Eventually, the gust subsided, and Nina gathered herself. She rose back to her feet. Then she began walking again. The crowd responded with encouragement. They applauded. She had survived the first scare. And slowly, Nina moved closer to safety. The opposite building was now directly ahead. She continued forward until she reportedly was only about 20 feet away. 20 feet. After crossing most of the distance, she could see the end of the rope. Peter, her husband, had already crossed it. Nina had almost done the same. Then, another gust of wind struck. This one was stronger. The rope shifted. Nina reacted immediately. She lowered herself again, desperately attempting to regain control. But this time, she couldn't. Her balance pole could no longer save her. Her body slipped from the rope. For an instant, Nina Conway was suspended in empty space above Lincoln Street. Then she fell 40 feet. The horrified crowd watched helplessly as Nina plunged toward the dirt road below. There was no net to catch her, no safety line, nothing to break the fall. She struck the ground. The celebration stopped. Only moments earlier, people had been cheering Peter Conway's successful crossing. Now hundreds of stunned spectators were standing at Nina's body in the street. Peter rushed to his wife, but there was nothing he could do. Nina Conway was dead. The New Year's Eve celebration had become a tragedy. And Peter Conway had gone from passing a bucket through an excited crowd to kneeling beside his dead wife in a matter of minutes. Imagine what that must have felt like for the people who witnessed it, especially the children. They had come downtown expecting entertainment. They watched Peter walk through the sky. Then his wife followed. They saw her struggle with the wind. They saw her recover. They probably thought the danger had subsided. She was only 20 feet from safety, and they watched her fall. Nina was buried in Tullahoma's Evergreen Cemetery. According to the story, a local woodworker fashioned a simple cedar marker for her grave. The inscription identified the woman buried beneath it. Nina, aerial artist, wife of Peter Conway, 1872. There's something particularly appropriate about describing her simply as an aerial artist. That's what Nina had been. She made her living in the air. And it was in the air above Tullahoma that she died. Peter Conway was devastated, and rightfully so. But traveling performers rarely have the luxury of simply just stopping. After losing his wife, Peter gathered his stuff and eventually sought employment with another circus. He left Tennessee behind. He left Tullahoma behind. But Tullahoma, they didn't forget Nina. Her death had happened publicly. Hundreds, if not thousands of people had supposedly seen it. The location remained there downtown. People could walk along Lincoln Street and look up at the building where the rope had once been stretched. They could point to where Peter started. They could point to where Nina fell. And when New Year's Eve returned, people remembered what happened exactly 1 year earlier. On December 31st, 1873, Tullahoma once again prepared to welcome a new year. Nina had been dead for 12 months. Peter was gone. The rope was gone. The performance was over. At least, it should have been. According to legend, a group of people celebrating New Year's Eve happened to look up toward the rooftop, where Nina's fatal walk had begun. And someone noticed a woman. At first, there was probably nothing particularly supernatural about it. Perhaps someone had climbed onto the roof. But then they noticed her clothing. The woman appeared to be dressed in circus attire. Clothing remarkably similar to what Nina Conway had been wearing when she stepped onto the rope the year before. People began pointing. Others looked upward. Attention shifted toward the mysterious woman standing above Lincoln Street. Then she disappeared. Not walked away, not climbed down. According to the story, she simply vanished. For the people who believe in ghosts, there was an obvious explanation. Nina had returned, and perhaps she had returned for a reason. She never finished her walk. The idea of a ghost repeating the circumstances surrounding its death appears in folklore throughout the world. A traumatic event becomes almost like a recording, On a certain night, at a certain place, or under certain circumstances, the event supposedly plays again. For Nina Conway, that night was New Year's Eve. And as the years passed, stories continued to circulate that the aerial artist could sometimes be seen around the anniversary of her death. People began watching the rooftops. Some believed Nina was trying to complete those final 20 feet. Others believed she was simply repeating her last moments over and over again. And the story didn't disappear when the people who remembered the original accident grew old and died. It was passed down to another generation, and then another. Decades passed. Tullahoma changed. It grew. The 19th century disappeared. Horses and wagons gave way to automobiles. Electric lights replaced lamps. The clothing worn by people on Lincoln Street changed. But according to the legend, Nina didn't change with them. She remained dressed like an aerial performer from another time. And then came one of the strangest stories connected to the haunting. New Year's Eve, 1931. Nearly 60 years had passed since Nina Conway fell to her death. Anyone walking through downtown Tullahoma that evening was living in a completely different world from the one Nina had known. Cars traveled the streets beneath the buildings. The Great Depression had begun. Radio connected communities to events hundreds of miles away. But sometime during the New Year's Eve celebration, 3 people reportedly looked toward the rooftop and saw something that belonged to 1872. A woman. She was standing high above the street, and she appeared to be wearing old-fashioned circus clothing. The witnesses watched. Then the woman stepped forward, and there was one major problem. There was no rope. Nina's tightrope had disappeared almost 60 years earlier, but according to the story, the woman stepped into empty air anyway. Her foot came down as though something solid was beneath it. She took another step, and another. The 3 witnesses stared upwards as the impossible figure began walking across Lincoln Street. She moved as though an invisible tightrope had been stretched beneath the buildings, but there was nothing beneath her feet. Nothing anyone could see. Yet she continued walking. And then something happened that made the story even stranger. A car approached below. The ghostly aerialist stopped. Nearly 60 years later, when Nina performed her final walk, automobiles weren't part of everyday life on Lincoln Street. Now one was passing directly beneath her. According to the legend, the woman paused in midair and waited for the car to pass. Then she continued. Step by step, the apparition walked through the sky. The witnesses remained below, watching something that shouldn't have been possible. The woman continued until she was roughly halfway across the street, and then she vanished. She never reached the other side. Once again, Nina's walk was unfinished. Whether the 1931 encounter happened exactly as later generations told it, it's impossible to know. Ghost stories change as they're repeated. Details are added, forgotten, or embellished. Memories become legends, and legends eventually become part of a town's identity. But that doesn't make the story of Nina Conway any less haunting. In some ways, it makes it more interesting. Because behind the ghost story is a tragedy. A traveling performer in Tullahoma hoping to entertain a crowd on New Year's Eve. She climbed onto a rooftop. She stepped onto a rope. She nearly made it across. And then the wind took it all away from her. For years, Nina's grave at Evergreen Cemetery was marked by that simple cedar headboard. But cedar doesn't last forever. Rain fell on it. Winters came and went. Summer heat baked it. Decades passed. Eventually, that old marker deteriorated, and Nina Conway's exact burial place was lost. And that's another strangely fitting detail in the story. The woman who supposedly returns to walk through the air doesn't have a surviving gravestone telling people where she rests. The marker disappeared, but her story didn't. More than a century and a half later, Nina Conway stepped onto that rope. The legend remains attached to Tullahoma. And perhaps the most chilling part of the story isn't that people claim to have seen her ghost. It's what the ghost is supposedly doing. She isn't wandering aimlessly. She isn't standing by a grave. She's not trying to frighten anyone. She's working. She's performing. She's doing the same thing she was doing in the final moments of her life, walking to the other side. Maybe that's why the story has survived. There's something almost unbearably sad about the idea that Nina is forever 20 feet away from completing her final performance. Every New Year's Eve, another year ends. The clock moves forward. Tullahoma changes. Buildings change. Generations come and go. But somewhere above Lincoln Street, Nina remains in 1872, steps away from the rooftop. She stretches out her arms. She finds her balance. She begins walking. Perhaps the rope is still there for her, even if the living can no longer see it. Maybe that's why those three witnesses in 1931 saw that woman in the old circus clothing stepping into empty air. Or perhaps the entire story is simply one of Tullahoma's greatest legends, creating from the memory of a tragedy embellished over generations. Either way, if you find yourself in downtown Tullahoma on New Year's Eve, take a moment and look toward the rooftops. Look carefully into the darkness above Lincoln Street. Because somewhere between one building and another, an aerial artist is still trying to finish the performance she began more than 150 years ago. And if you're fortunate, or perhaps unfortunate, enough to see a woman dressed in old-fashioned circus attire standing at the edge of a rooftop, keep watching. She might take a step, even if there's no rope beneath her feet. If you enjoyed this episode, check out my books, Southern Ghost Stories, Tennessee Tales, 1 and 2. That's right, there's 2 of them. Lots of weird, wild, ghostly history in the volunteer state. And also check out my latest book, Pistols of Red River, the Andrew Jackson Doolan story. And be on the lookout for my newest one, Arsenic Anna. Comes out September 7th. It's a wild story about a female serial killer in Cincinnati during the Great Depression. We're trying to reach 150 Apple Podcast reviews and 100 Spotify reviews for Halloween. If you've enjoyed the show, take 60 seconds to leave a review. Those help more people discover the show. Apple uses ratings and reviews to decide which shows to recommend, and a quick review helps other folks who love folklore and haunted history find the show. Have you guys been to Monster City Madhouse yet? The new shirt, man, is a whole lot of fun. Gravestone features a mashup of Tombstone and the Universal Monsters. This Monster City Madhouse exclusive shirts made from a comfortable 60/40 polyester cotton blend. With quotes like, "I'm your Huckleberry, and hell's coming with me." You'll be ready to unleash monster justice. And use promo code SAVE10 to get 10% off your order. That's right, monstercitymadhouse.com. Use promo code SAVE10. And I've got some appearances coming up in October. I'll be at Scarefest in Lexington, Kentucky, and a few others I'm still working on. I'll make some announcements in a few weeks with all the details. And speaking of announcements, I have some new books dropping next month. You guys know about that. So be sure to like Southern Ghost Stories on Facebook and Instagram. Send me your questions on our socials, or you can use the email account set up, southernghoststories@gmail.com. And I do a Q&A usually once every 2 months, so I get comments and questions all the time, and it's fun getting the feedback and also answering questions. Anyway, thanks for listening to the show, guys. This is Southern Ghost Stories. I'm Allen Sircy, the American Haunt Historian, and I'll see you guys later. If you love ghost stories, folklore, and all things mysterious, you need to make a trip to Haunted in downtown Tullahoma, Tennessee. Just a short drive from Nashville, this family-owned Gothic shop is filled with the strange, unusual, and downright fascinating. This isn't a big box store full of mass-produced decorations. Haunted specializes in handmade curiosities, Gothic decor, metaphysical supplies, green witchcraft essentials, and unique pieces created by independent artists. Whether you're decorating or just looking for something you won't find anywhere else, Haunted is worth the trip. Visit them on 125 West Lincoln Street in Tullahoma, or shop online at hauntedstore.net. That's right, hauntedstore.net. Haunted, curated for the strange and unusual. Coming October 2nd, the gates open at Smith County's scariest attraction, Nightmare Hollow. Located at 160 Marina Lane, Carthage, Tennessee, every Friday and Saturday from 8 p.m. to 10:30. Admission starts at $20 with Fast Pass and VIP options. Nightmare Hollow is a haunted trail located at Defeated Creek Marina and Campground. Recently rebranded from Nightmare on Marina Lane, Nightmare Hollow has made several upgrades for this season, including an additional trail, upgraded scenes, Fast Pass and VIP options, and a gift shop featuring local vendors and merchandise featuring our logo and characters. Come out and see what all the hype is about.